we talk about using LinkedIn because 91% of recruiters are on LinkedIn daily, but only 43% of pilots actually use it. So if you're one of the folks out there that goes, LinkedIn, I've never heard of a pilot getting hired from LinkedIn. Exactly, because they're not on the platform. So you have 10-1 odds in your favor of getting in touch with the person you need. If you want to get online and send out your resumes, knock yourself out, it's really a lot easier. Just print 5,000 copies of your resume out and light them on fire in your living room. At least you'll be warm at the end of that. But emailing them out is just a complete and utter waste of time.
You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Welcome to the 21.5 Show, a podcast for professional pilots by professional pilots. Join Dylan and Max, both with experience in flight instruction, the airlines, and business aviation, as they talk to a variety of industry experts, share stories, and have a little fun along the way.
City to city, coast to coast, and around the state of Arizona, which is currently very hot, and parts of it are on fire.
Inhibiting our ability to go home.
Well, we took a little family vacation, and the road home is closed, so we're doing a little improvised recording.
Podcast from my parents' cabin.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
So we're doing it in this office, fully decorated with golf memorabilia. Very inspiring.
If you could just close your eyes and imagine.
Yeah.
It's a real treat.
Very aviation inspiring, but we got a great show coming up today, Max. We had another conversation with James O'Neill and Jason from Raven Careers. And as usual, we started going, we'll just do a quick 20 minutes. And then...
Yeah, hour and a half later, we're like, we better wrap this up. But it's funny. Every time I walk away from an interview with James and those guys, I always at the end of it think, I'm like, I really had not considered at least two things that they say. Yeah. There's always a couple of really good nuggets in that I'm like, wow, I didn't even think about it from that perspective. So always a treat having the boys from Raven on.
I think what I appreciate from them is their outside the box thinking. And if we look at all of the projections on what could happen this fall, the marketplace is going to be very competitive with a lot of really qualified candidates. So you're going to have to think outside the box to find good opportunities.
Yeah, the days of just firing out your resume are over, boys and girls.
So we've got a great conversation with them, but before we do that, the mailbag's pretty heavy. We've been neglecting it for the last couple episodes. We've been so busy. So let's open that sucker up. Good thing we brought that on vacation.
Yeah, let's crack the mailbag. So this is from a listener. It says, let's say you're a flight instructor that's already done all of the extra instructor stuff like CFII, MEI, check instructor. Only thing left for me to upgrade to is upset recovery and a super decathlon, which would be awesome. And you had a class date at an airline prior to COVID, which was postponed indefinitely. What's the move? Stick with my current instructor job, which is pretty lucrative, stable, and cush as far as instructor jobs go. Try and get a gig at a decent 135/91 corporate outfit. Maybe do cargo in Alaska. When hiring picks up, I'm willing to bet I'll be competing against furloughed airline pilots. Teaching single engine ILS approaches in VMC over and over again is only so valuable. I have some definite opinions on this, if you can believe that. But I think a big disservice that you can do to yourself if you are truly one of the lovers of aviation, like you're in it because you're passionate, not because being an airline pilot is a good gig with lots of time off and a good retirement program, is this guy is in the perfect position to have opportunity to go do something different and memorable in his aviation career, because there's plenty of people I've flown with them. They were in my class at the major airline I work for that had gone from flight instructor, regional airline, and their last job as a major airline pilot. And that's it. And if you look at the timing right now, nothing's going to happen real quick for this guy. He's got the time. I think flying the super decathlon and teaching upset training and getting some tailwheel experience would be great. I did that exact path that he's describing, and that was the last step I did before I left, and it was awesome experience. I love it. I use it to, till this day, flying tailwheel stuff. But I think when he says maybe go do cargo in Alaska or do something adventurous, probably a younger guy, doesn't have family to worry about, things like that. Yeah, go overseas, go fly a Helio Stallion in French Guyana or something. Go do something like that. I think that would be awesome. And really, you may think flying single engine turbine somewhere or whatever isn't going to do anything for your career. I'll tell you what, when you go into an interview and they say, tell me about a time in so-and-so, and you can relate it back to a really interesting flying job that you had flying somewhere overseas or doing, mission work and flying some dude that got, speared in a tribal war or something like that. And you can bring that sort of story to the table, that you will stand out against the other candidates that said, well, in the CRJ 700 flying into O'Hare for the 9,000th time.
Failure.
We had a pack failure. I mean, nobody cares, but that'll make people sit up in their seats. So in summation, do something interesting. Find a job doing something that you'll never have the other opportunity to do in a traditional airline or even corporate career path. Go do something different. Yeah, fly in the bush in Alaska would be a great start. Canada, go South America, go do something as long as it's legal.
That's right. That's good advice. And I'm in total agreement with you. And that's actually what I wrote him back on Instagram. So I said, do an adventure job. This is your time. I'm assuming you're probably pretty young and out of college and not laden with responsibilities. So there's a very small window in your life where you'll have that opportunity. So
there'll be a very large window where you'll look back though and say, God, I wish I would have done whatever. And it's too late. So, when you have 3 kids and you're trying to figure stuff out. So,
but one thing I would say, he did say, try and get a gig at a decent 135 or 91 corporate outfit. And I've actually had a few conversations with some other people recently about this, and they've had some 91 opportunities, maybe right out of instructing. And I do think that you have to be careful. When I got out of the airlines, I left with maybe only 1,500 hours and went and took a corporate job where I was flying only maybe 100 to 120 hours a year, which sounded awesome, but it wasn't doing a whole lot for my logbook. So I would caution him, if he's going to go do something, flying the King Air at home 100 hours a year, or something like that, you got to be careful.
Yeah, don't go for a cush. Whatever you do, make sure you're flying. And you got to fly while you're young and do the most interesting stuff you can do.
Okay, next email. This is the award for the longest email we've ever received and most well thought out. This comes from Erin, and I'm going to have to paraphrase this because it's quite long. But essentially, they're talking about mask usage during flight. She's in a corporate operation, and so they're flying their own passengers. It looks like it's Part 91 here, so it's probably known folks. But it seems like they've got some pretty strict guidelines in place for the operation. They're doing passenger screening before departure and mask and glove usage prior to departure and that kind of stuff. And basically her question is, what do we think on wearing a mask while in flight, en route?
Go ahead. I have some stuff to say on this too.
You have some thoughts and I have some thoughts. So, what I did is I sent this email out to Dave Keys, who we had on the show a couple episodes ago. He was the chairman of the Small Flight Department Committee for NBAA, just to see if he had anyone in their committee or any of the operators they work with to see if they had any feedback. And his answer was kind of similar to the answer that I would give, and I'm expecting that you're going to give also, is that most operators right now are... the mask and glove usage typically ends once the aircraft is under power. And then that's when the masks are removed. I did some research on Pro Pilot World and also in some of the Facebook groups. I would see that the majority of people that I saw on there, they also were doing the same thing, removing the mask once the aircraft was underway. The interesting thing I did see was quite a few comments from the folks that did have to wear their mask while in flight. They actually said that it wasn't an issue talking on the radio, which I thought was kind of interesting. So,
I think that it boils down to the quick donning mask. I mean, the FAA is, I'm reading it straight from the FAA. You have to don it with one hand in 5 seconds or less,
right,
while accommodating prescription glasses. Doesn't say anything about a face mask. And so I'm surprised the FAA hasn't gotten involved and said, look, guys, this airplane was certified a quick donning mask. We haven't done testing. Yeah. You can't even mount an iPad to the yoke without having testing done, right, let alone this. So yeah, I'm of the position, which is what I think most people are. And that is what is at my airline too, is that, in view of the passengers, you wear a mask, you get in the cockpit, mask comes off. And I think the biggest consideration is the quick donning mask thing.
And she did some great research too, and went and dug into the case where the oxygen intake they analyzed on surgeons. There is an actual reduction in the intake from oxygen. I think that also is something to contemplate. I get it. You do all this work to sterilize the airplane, and you're wearing the mask, and the line guys are wearing the mask, and they're doing this whole thing. You load the plane, and then you fire it up, and then you take the mask off, and then off you go. So I can see kind of the paradox there. And so her question was really the end of the question was, how do we bring this to management? If this is a company policy, what is the correct way to bring it to management? And
has this been discussed with the POI?
Yeah. So, and if it's a Part 91 operation,
dude, everything in aviation before it is approved has to be tested. That's it. It's just that how it is. I mean, you have to have burn certs on the leather on the seat. I mean, everything has to be tested and run through that process. And until that's done, you just can't. And I think you'll get the same guidance from the feds, but
yeah, I think to me, honestly, the strongest argument, if this was my operation and I was going to go to the department manager, or maybe it's over the department manager's head, but I would say, look, here's what NetJets does. Here's what FlexJet does. Here's what all of the major airlines are doing. This is probably the industry, best practice at this point, with coupling along with what you said about the quick donning oxygen mask. So I think it was a great email, Aaron. Like we said, it was probably the best email we've ever got. She put a lot of work into it. So hopefully we answered your question. I don't know. If not, you can get a full refund.
All right. Last one was a review from iTunes. The podcast I've been searching for. Many of the more popular aviation podcasts are geared towards the casual enthusiasts. And while this makes them approachable, it leaves something to be desired for the professional pilots. Max and Dylan do an excellent job of finding interesting guests and discussing topics that are very relevant to those of us who fly for a living or are serious about doing so in the future. I'm a new airline pilot, but have been in aviation for over a decade and absolutely learned something new in every episode, in addition to a few good laughs. Keep up the good work. That's from username of Gillyhawk. So thanks for the kind words. Always appreciated.
I think we need to give away some merch for someone that writes an iTunes review. Cheap. What's the cheapest thing we have in the store?
Stickers. Cheap to procure, cheap to ship.
That's right. We will send off some stickers to a randomly selected user who, between now and July 15th, if you leave a review on iTunes for us, we'll pick someone completely at random. I'll have one of my kids pick it at random, and we'll send you off a little care package. I was cruising online the other day on Facebook. I can't remember which of the groups it was, but someone I think they're writing a study, or they're doing some research, but essentially they were asking a question about the primary caregiver for a pilot's children. And they were asking, okay, do you split it with your spouse who works, or is it just...
Split what?
Is the caregiving for the children?
Oh, okay.
So they say, if you're a professional pilot, do you and your spouse split it because your spouse works too? Option 2, is your spouse the primary caregiver or spouse or partner while you're on the road? And then option 3 was I don't have kids or something like that. But anyways, the interesting thing was that a large number of the answers were talking about the spouse providing care because, in our business, it's very difficult sometimes when we're on the road. And it just drove home the point to me that Rob Alston made to us at Harvey Watt, talking about life insurance. For a long time, I always got the life insurance policy on me. And I didn't think about, well, what happens if something happens to my spouse?
Yeah, everybody looks at it as an income replacement insurance, which it isn't, because while if you have a non-working spouse and something happens to he or she, you have to figure out childcare, and then that's an expense. So that's essentially what you're insuring against, right? When you insure a spouse.
Exactly. So that's exactly what I did. I switched my life insurance policy to my spouse, and then I thought that made a lot more sense.
Well, you got rid of yours?
No, I kept mine.
You got a smaller one.
I got a smaller one for mine and a larger one for her, and it made a lot more sense.
But wouldn't it make sense if you kicked the bucket and you're the breadwinner financially, don't you have to have a bigger policy to replace that loss in income?
We're in kind of
versus
a weird,
increase in
we're in a
expense, or-
weird situation because my spouse is a professional, so she can still.
All right, well, let's get your tax return out and really
we'll
dive into
go
this.
through this. I don't think the listeners care too much.
Let's call Rob.
Yeah.
Let's get full financial disclosure.
My point is that if you haven't considered life insurance on your spouse, if you're a professional pilot and you're traveling a lot and they're the ones providing care to your kids, it's probably something you should consider.
Yeah, we're not talking daycare.
Yeah.
We're talking live-in,
Right.
nanny, real deal.
Need to have. So some to consider.
Don't count on your parents.
Yeah.
It's not right.
Harvey Watt does do life insurance. I've got a policy with them. It's very easy to set up. The great thing is there's hardly any exclusions except for suicide. They waive that after a couple of years, which means you can still skydive. You can still own your own airplane and fly in GA, which a lot of life insurance policies
They don't have like a scuba diving rider or any of that stuff, right?
Not from what I understand. So for all the details, contact Harvey Watt. It's harveywatt.com. And maybe take a look at how you're spreading those policies out. All right. Well, let's get right to that conversation with James and Jason from Raven Careers. All right, back again. It's our friends from Raven Careers. We've got James O'Neill and Jason joining us. Welcome back to the program, fellas.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us again. See, I'm out of practice. It's been a while.
Jeez.
So back in March, we were doing podcasts fast and furious every couple of days. There was so much changing, and then we kind of took a break, went up for air, and now it seems like all of the fallout is happening. Some of the uncertainties being removed. We're seeing a lot of displacement bids at the major airlines that are kind of maybe a harbinger of what's to come. So we wanted to have you guys back on the show to talk a little bit about the preparation that professional pilots should be doing right now in this kind of limbo time, I guess you'll call it. In the previous episodes, you guys had mentioned warming up your network was really important right now. I want to drill down a little bit on how exactly you do that.
Sure. So the difficulty that a lot of guys are facing right now is if they get too far ahead of themselves and they start applying for jobs, right? The problem is if they get offered a job, but they either haven't been furloughed or they don't know if they're going to get furloughed, they're kind of screwed because they're going to have to burn a bridge more than likely, right? Somebody invested all this time, all this money in interviewing them. They now want to offer them a job. And then you walk in and go, oh, can we wait like 3 more months just in case? I'm not really 100% sure, right? So you get yourself into a situation where you burn a bridge. And now if you need that job 2, 3, 4 months from now, it's not there. The flip side of the coin is nobody wants to get caught off guard where a furlough notice goes out and now all of a sudden they and 3, 4, 5, 8, 10,000 of their buddies are all applying to the same jobs. Because that's actually what's happened right now. If you take a look at April 5th was roughly the time when Compass and TSA shut down. 900 resumes were received by every HR department that day. And when you talk to the HR recruiters, I mean, it's overwhelming. Today's the day we're recording this is June 10th. I think it was about 800 people Emirates just announced they're laying off. So guess what? There's a bunch of Emirates resumes now that are sitting in the stack. So you have this awkward situation where if you're a United pilot or a Delta pilot or a GoJet pilot or a Mesa pilot, right? And you're like, I don't know how this is going to go, right? Apply now. And then turns out you don't get furloughed, right? At least not maybe October 1st. And now you just burned a bridge. And if you apply or if you don't apply and then you wait too long, your resume gets buried. So the insurance policy for that type of situation is actually networking, where you create a network of folks that are completely aware of the situation that you're in and what you're going through, right? They know you're in this limbo state. And should you need to lean on them, they're there. And if you don't need to lean on them, congratulations, you have a great network put together that you can use to help one of your buddies. So that's kind of the name of the game right now, is to get down that path of warming up that network. I kind of think about it like car insurance, right? You get car insurance, but nobody plans on wrapping their car around a tree, right? You get car insurance just in case you wrap the car around the tree. I mean, that's kind of the same thing here when it comes to networking.
So when we look at networking, how do you do that? I mean, should we just start walking around the airport with resumes and a tie around our neck and banging on the door of every hangar, or joining Facebook groups? Like, what should we do?
Once again, not concerned about starting up a competitive business if that's your approach. The easiest way to explain networking is networking works the exact same way banking does. So for example, I bank with Chase. So think about, you decide you want to start banking with Chase. So you walk into the bank, you open up an account. Okay. Now you go out, you go to work, and you take your money and you deposit it into that account. And you sit there and you deposit and you deposit and you deposit until you have a big enough amount of savings that one day when something goes wrong, you take your card, go up to an ATM machine, swipe it in, and magically money comes out. And that's basically how networking works. So the first thing you have to do is you have to open up an account. In this case, we talk about using LinkedIn because 91% of recruiters are on LinkedIn daily, but only 43% of pilots actually use it. So if you're one of the folks out there that goes, LinkedIn, I've never heard of a pilot getting hired from LinkedIn. Exactly. It's because they're not on the platform. So you have 10-1 odds in your favor of getting in touch with the person you need if you just get on LinkedIn. The second thing is there's roughly about 600 million people that use LinkedIn, and that's across all industries, but only 3 million people comment daily. So if you are commenting on topics that demonstrate that you are knowledgeable in your field, you basically are getting all this free press that you would not get on Facebook, that you wouldn't get on Instagram, that you won't get by applying to jobs online, because it's such a crowded field in those arenas. I mean, if you want to get online and send out your resumes, knock yourself out, it's really a lot easier. Just print 5,000 copies of your resume out and light them on fire in your living room. At least you'll be warm at the end of that. But emailing them out is just a complete and utter waste of time. So you open up a LinkedIn account. Once you open up the account, same thing like banking, you got to configure it, right? In banking, you open up multiple different types of accounts. You have a savings account, you have a checking account. Okay. So when you get on LinkedIn, you have to configure your feed so that the right information is popping up, right? Because the ultimate goal is you want to get on there and you want to comment. Because if you comment, right, if you leave posts, people start to learn who you are. So maybe you start following some companies you want to target, right? Let's say you want to target Atlas, or you want to target ABX, or you want to target Jet Suite or Executive Jet Management or Jet Aviation. Go into the search bar, type in the company, hit follow. Now, magically, everything about these companies is popping up daily. Next thing you do is you start to follow hashtags, right? Hashtag aviation, hashtag pilot jobs. Pro Pilot World's got their hashtag. Raven Careers has their hashtag, right? So you go on there and you type the hashtag into the search bar and you hit follow. Now, different types of pilot jobs are showing up in your feed. Different types of things about aviation, maybe safety, are showing up in your feed, right? So now when you log in every day, right, the big mistake that most folks make is, and it really doesn't matter. You can be a military pilot, you can be a pilot at United, you can be a corporate pilot. What they do is they connect to other people that are like them. Well, guess what? If you're a United or Delta pilot and you get laid off in, I don't know, October 2020, and all you've done is connected to other United and Delta pilots, well, congratulations. You can all talk on LinkedIn about how you just got laid off.
Well, that's an important point, because most pilots assimilate networking with other pilots because of word of mouth jobs. But what you're saying is to not network with fellow pilots, but more network with companies that are potential employers, huh?
That, plus I'll give you an even better way to do it. So what we do is we have people pull out a sheet of paper and we draw a circle in the dead center of the paper and we put aircraft owner, right? So if somebody wants to buy an airplane, and I'll use corporate as an example. Okay, well, if they're going to buy an airplane, they're going to need to insure the airplane, which means they need an insurance broker. They might need a charter broker. They are probably going to need a salesperson. They're probably going to need an FBO. So what am I going to do? I'm going to type in all the FBOs in the geographic area that I live in, and I'm going to connect to everybody that works there. And I'm going to find all the insurance brokers in my area, and I'm going to connect to all those people and the salespeople and so on and so forth. And now, all of a sudden, I'm connected to all the people that the owner is going to get in contact with before they make any type of move, which means I'm applying for the job before the job even exists. Well, it's really hard to have to compete with 5,000 resumes when no one even knows the job exists yet. So I'll give you a real good example. I'm connected to a bunch of salespeople on LinkedIn, and I'm watching what aircraft they're selling and where they're selling them to. So I can see what's going on in the market. Why would I want to limit myself to just talking to another pilot when I have all this information out there that I could use to gauge what's going on? Some of the best resources of information are the people that work behind the desk at FBOs. How often does the airplane move? How is the flight crew? What is the owner like? Where do their trips go to? I get ridiculous amounts of information from folks that work behind counters at FBOs.
You know, the difference between networking with other pilots, if you're an airline guy or a corporate guy, because what are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like a lot of corporate jobs originate and end with a pilot in smaller flight departments, right?
They may. It depends. I mean, once again, if you're talking about a flight department that's already established, that's correct. Well, that's why connecting to pilots is a component of the networking. It's just not the sum total. So if I want to connect to pilots, that's why I'm a huge advocate of the regional business aviation associations, right? You know, AZBAA. We have in Ohio ORBA, ORBAA. But, you know, you go into Google and you Google regional business aviation associations, they put on events all year long. Now, some of them are golfing events. I don't go to those because golfing is a nature walk for me, you know, but they do other things, like they'll do safety events. They do a whole bunch of different stuff. So that's one way. But if you have a job that doesn't exist yet, there is no pilot to talk to. If the jet has not been acquired yet, there is no pilot to talk to. The person that you need to be talking to is the salesperson that can tell you what's going on in your market, what's moving, what are they buying, right? The person you want to talk to is a charter sales coordinator. I talk to them all the time and go, hey, what's happening in charter? How's the market looking? How busy are you? How many inquiries are you getting, right? Now, if you get on LinkedIn and you take the questions I just gave you and rapid fire those, it's not going to work. There's a method, and we can talk about that here in a little bit, how to get people to talk to you, right? But you start to get all this information where you go, oh man, there's a boatload of stuff happening in the mid-size market right now in my area. Like there's a boatload of Hawkers and Challengers that are moving. Okay, cool. Well, that's pretty useful to know. So pilots are a component of it, but they're not the sum total of it.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's good advice.
So when you're getting your profile set up, you talked about getting your feed going. Talk about how you describe yourself. What kind of photo do you put out? I mean, the picture of you in the Hawaiian shirt on your overnight and the white New Balances, is that good enough? Or the picture of you with your oxygen mask on in the cockpit in your uniform?
So I'll use a really good example. And look, it's easy to pick on, right? Double-breasted jacket and hat. And so, look, we've had a pretty sizable influx of legacy airline pilots that have been reaching out to us over the past, let's call it month and a half, that are on board with what we're saying. They're using the techniques that we're talking about. But the big thing that we do is, how do you wipe the airline stink off, right? So one of the ways you do that is what you just said, is the photo. Get rid of the photo with the hat and the jacket. Get rid of it. Done. Move it. Okay. The second thing is, how do you brand yourself, right? So if you put a major airline Boeing 737 pilot, nobody's gonna hire you, right? So you've got to brand yourself, and we can talk about that, a little bit more in terms of the headline. And then when we go through in each of your job descriptions in your about section, we write executive bios and we write descriptions in each of the section that kind of talks about, okay, what value are you bringing to the department? Now, it's going to differ depending on, are you just trying to attract cargo operators like UPS, FedEx, Atlas, or ABX? Or are you just trying to target corporate operators, right? JetSuite X, JetEdge, the whole nine, right? Or are you trying to target both? And so depending on what you're doing, at least when we write the profiles, we tailor them accordingly.
Yeah, language is extraordinarily important, right? So you want to not be a generic account on there. You don't want to have commercial pilot as your headline. You want to be able to use keywords and use industry accepted terminology to make sure that you're searchable, keyword optimize everything so that when someone's going on and they're looking for something in particular, or they're posting a job and utilizing the algorithms of LinkedIn, that you actually come up, that you're able to be found, and that you're not scaring them away when they look at your profile. Instead, you're inviting them to dig deeper and look into who you are more so. Now, on the topic of pictures, I'm a bad example, right? I have not had a good picture of me taken in a long time. I'm usually wearing a hat or something like that. So my picture is something that I need to change because it's a family picture, but it's a good one of me, I think, at least as good as they get.
Your family looks better.
Exactly. That's why I use it. But it's important to make sure that when they are looking at that profile, that they can identify who the person is, right? You don't want to confuse them. So you want to ensure that it's a good professional photo of yourself and not something goofy. I mean, it's important for your personality to come through, but make sure it represents you as a professional.
So that you can't whip this together in 5 minutes is what you're saying. You have to actually put some thought into this.
No, it's really neat to watch at least our service in action, because we've got a team of 9 advisors over at Raven. And when we work with a client, we work with them as a team. I don't think people realize what goes into it. Keywords and language are so important, and our writers are extremely talented. I look at it with like a recruiter eye, or an outside view when I'm watching them work through the profiles. We have ideas that come up that may seem as though they work, but then somebody else take a look at it and realize that it might not work well for them, because maybe it pushes them away from a corporate operator, or they're using location in a way that doesn't work to their benefit. You guys have both flown corporate, and you know how important location is, right? So maybe we word a airline profile for somebody that's looking to go to the corporate side of things, and let them know that they worked for the company they do, because it's just logical, because it's location based, and they want to stay in that location, right? So making sure we optimize for that is important. But on the backside, we post the title lines, we post the description of the individual, and have the entire team look at it. And it's real fun to watch how that develops, and how we identify strengths and weaknesses, and we get walking down roads just to make sure that it really pops and stands out. The whole point of the LinkedIn profile, at least at this stage, looking forward to what may come in October, is to try to build up the best safe landing zone we can for the individual. So we want to make sure that it's optimized for that.
So a regular account is free, right? But what about the premium service? Is that worthwhile if you're a pilot trying to get connected?
Couldn't tell you. Never used it. Don't have to.
You don't have a premium account?
No. Why would I want to spend the money on it if I don't have to?
I don't know. That's what I'm asking you, James.
I spend about 30 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes at night. That's it. Where you will run into an issue where the premium accounts do come into play. Like I'm bumping up against that now, where I'm just in contact with so many people that it will start to limit your searches. But initially, use the free version until you run out of features on the free version where it goes, hey, you have to pay to continue to search or something. No, use the free version. It's fine. But I'll go on and I'll search for folks 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the evening. Whenever I connect to them, I always leave a message. I don't connect with someone without leaving them a message. We call it show them that you know them. So one of the easiest things is I'll read through what other people comment on. In fact, I did it earlier today. Somebody posted a photo about something, and I went, connect. Hey man, photo was really cool. Reminded me of this. Just figured I'd reach out and say hi. Started a conversation. Sometimes I'll go read through their profile, and I'll see. I had a couple of folks the other day that I ran into that had some commonalities in terms of flying, but I'm from Jersey, so they were from New York. Connected to him, hey man, I saw you from this area. Just thought I'd reach out and say hi. Started a conversation. So, you want to make sure you're taking the time not to be generic. Don't ever lead with, can you help me get a job? Don't do that. If we reuse kind of the banking analogy, you would never walk into Chase. You would never walk into Bank of America if you don't have an account there and go, can I get $100? right? They're going to go, no. Well, come on, guys. You got like thousands back there. I just want 100. It's no big deal, right? No, you would never do that. It's absurd. Well, asking someone to do something for you before you've taken the time to build a relationship, before you've taken the time to get to know them, right, is absurd. You would never do that in real life. So don't do it in networking. But you reach out and you start conversations. I've had, I can't go too far in depth on what the exact scenario was, but I connected to somebody on a Friday, and just a casual conversation. Didn't ask them for anything. Was just, hey, had something in common. Tuesday, they said, hey, look, one of my buddies just got laid off from a company. Can I put you in contact with him? Yeah, sure. And then he put me in contact with 10 other of his buddies that got laid off. I didn't know that was going to happen, right? I mean, I was just starting a conversation. So I don't mean that the process doesn't have to be slow, but don't be transactional, right? It's networking. It's not prostitution.
Yeah, there's ways to network where you're not asking for things, right? You're providing a value, providing a service and content. And that's something that we work with our clients to identify what their skills are and to encourage them to provide assistance to people. And you're doing it in a way that you're showcasing your skills and what you're good at, so that in the future, you might be able to call on one of those people that's frequently commenting on your post or learning from what you're posting, if you may need them in the future.
And to be clear, there's a lot of pilots that we get questions on, and they're like, well, what do you mean provide assistance? In a lot of the times, assistance is just providing information. So there's a lot of times when you can connect to people and you can give them information that they don't already have that makes their life easier. I know there's a ton of guys at Legacy Airlines right now, for example, that are like, what information could I give? Well, you know exactly what's going on inside your company. Think about how many HR recruiters would like a heads up that they're about to get hit with 4,000 resumes. That might be valuable to them. So there's a lot of different types of information that you can share with people that you would not necessarily think it wouldn't be intuitive, but you're helping them out by sharing that information.
So let's play this out. Let's say right now, a bunch of our listeners get on LinkedIn, get their profile, start making deposits into the bank, networking, and then what we may expect happens this fall happens and they get furloughed or laid off. Do you just make a broadcast that announcement and say, I'm now a free agent, or I've just been laid off? How do you handle kind of transitioning and starting that conversation?
So you could make a broadcast, but it's going to get drowned out because 7,999 other people just like you are probably going to try and do that exact same thing.
Oh, so James is announcing 8,000 pilots will be furloughed.
Yeah, exactly. That 8,000 number did come from someplace. I can share with that later if you'd like.
Premium Patreon subscribers.
Yeah, exactly. So we ran an analysis from post September 11th, and like I said, I'll share it later.
We're going to get to that later.
No, you don't broadcast like that. The idea is, if the networking is done properly, number one, the folks that you're talking to, you're sharing information with them on a continual basis, and the continual varies depending on the person, right? That could be week by week, month by month, right? But they know what's happening. And so, ideally, if the networking is happening right, they'll reach out to you before you reach out to them. But secondarily, no, you're not doing a broadcast. What you're doing is you're contacting people one by one and saying, hey, this is an update. This is what's going on. The cool thing about networking is there are stages to it. So stage one is what we call trust and rapport. Stage two is what we call intelligence gathering. Stage three is actual job prospecting. And then stage four is actually job offers. So when you're in the trust and rapport stage, you're not asking anyone for anything other than a conversation, right? All you're doing is, can I start a conversation with you? The objective is to see if you can transition that into intelligence gathering. And what I mean by that is that you're sharing information with people and they're sharing information with you. Because otherwise what happens is you go online and you look up job postings and you find there's 35 job postings in your area. But what you don't know is that there's only 3 of them that will actually consider hiring you. And so in the intelligence gathering phase, what's happening is you're trying to narrow that down as much as possible. So you know, what are the 3 positions I should be putting 100% of my energy into, instead of dividing my energy up amongst whatever 50 or 100. And then ideally, and this is why we're advocating starting the networking now, because it's not something that you just, turn on immediately, right? But that intelligence gathering shifts into, okay, hey, now that I know what's going on in the market and where opportunities are, you convert that into, hey guys, just want to reach out and let you know one-on-one, or you reach out to people one-on-one. Hey, just want to let you know this is what's going on. Don't want to bother you, but if you get any information on any place you think may be a good fit based on the conversations we had, I'd really appreciate you handing that, sharing that with me, or say it much more eloquently than what I just did, right? But basically what you're saying is, hey, look, if you know any place to direct my attention, I would really appreciate a helping hand, right? And then you use that to shift into, okay, now I need to job prospect. I need to actually get an opportunity to go into an interview to then get a job. So.
And when I was recruiting, there were people that would reach out to me on all sorts of different venues: email, Facebook, LinkedIn. And I do like LinkedIn because that's what it's for, right? So when someone reaches out to you via that source, it's expected, but utilizing the proper language and working hard to not be a pest is important as well. I certainly had quite a few people that would bug me to the point where I knew I did not want to invite them in. So we work with the clients as well to arrange that first contact, make sure the language is proper for that, and then kind of walk them down guidelines on how to not be that annoying, pestering person, and how to be someone that's bringing value and showcasing that value to the prospective recruiter.
So has networking in person kind of gone by the wayside, like dating has? Is it all transitioned to apps and not in person, or is there still a place for that in networking?
No, it's still incredibly important. We will work with that as well. We have a recent client I was working with in a coaching session, and they were just shooting out apps everywhere, and 40, 50 apps out and 2 responses. So you gotta mount an attack on different levels, right? We've had it work with clients where they've walked into airline offices, particular ones that are open to that. And it definitely works with the corporate side of things too. But you got to go about doing it properly. The corporate's still pretty old school in the ways that I think we all learned and have used throughout our careers. Pro pilot world is one, that works fantastic for networking as well, above and beyond LinkedIn and knocking on doors. But they each hold their value. It's a matter of executing on it properly.
Jason touched on a couple of good points. So the first one about bothering people. There's a difference between bothering somebody and being what we call politely persistent, right? So if you stop at the first no, you're probably not going to get very far in life. But how you react to that no and how you overcome it matters, right? You're not going to badger the person into talking to you, but you are going to have to do some things that are creative to capture their attention. The second piece of it is, when you ask the question about is it all apps and is face-to-face networking dead, the objective of networking is to get someone on the phone or face-to-face, right? You're trying to transition from an app to face-to-face. But when we take a look at, I was having a conversation with somebody, I can't remember if it was earlier today or yesterday, but I talked about how we use LinkedIn to get past the gatekeeper. And he goes, oh, who's the gatekeeper? And I go, no. It's not one person. It's the physical gate in front of their building that you can't get through, right? Then it's the locked front door. Then it's the, executive assistant or secretary that meets you at the front gate. Then it's human resource, right? There's like 15 barriers between you and the person you want to talk to. So we use LinkedIn to get over, as many of those gates as is humanly possible, so that we can transition off of a platform and onto a phone call or a face-to-face. I will be honest, it's a little bit more complicated now because of COVID. So before it was significantly easier to get face-to-face. Now what you're really face-to-face is really now Zoom and telephone effectively.
I thought you were going to say mask to mask.
Yeah, it is. It's mask to mask. Now, will that change in 6 months, 9 months, a year? Yeah, probably will. But right now, what you're basically shooting for is a Zoom call.
That's a whole different. I imagine you guys coach your clients a little bit on how to do Zoom and Skype interviews too.
It's funny because, all the techniques and tactics that we're discussing, we use personally. That's why we know they work. And so between Jason and I, we spend loads of time talking to recruiters, airline recruiters, corporate recruiters, pretty much any place somebody's interviewing right now. We're talking to folks. And the stories you get of what people do when they show up to interviews are just astonishing. And it's not a matter of people being, lazy or irresponsible. It's everyone's adapting to this new world, right? Where you get on a Zoom call and like your dog goes running around, or you didn't tell your spouse and they're like putting their shirt on as they're walking down. You can go on YouTube and watch those like at-home news bloopers, right? So, whereas let's call it 6 months ago, it was significantly easier to say to people, hey, look, when you're doing a Zoom call, you need to make sure there's no animals in your house, no kids in your house, and your spouse knows what room you're in, right? Make sure you're scheduling the time, make sure you're, the background behind you is a clean background. Even if you have to hang, a sheet or something, make sure you're clean shaven, make sure you're at least from the waist up wearing some type of professional attire. If you're only from the waist up, don't stand up without without shutting your camera off. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that people are having to get used to. I mean, I can tell you in my own house, we've definitely put restrictions on where Zoom calls are held because, some folks have made it on camera waking up at noon.
So we had some questions from social media. A few folks, we just asked, what are their frustrations? What are their questions about networking? Got some interesting replies. One of them from RGPD, he said, HR departments are replying with hiring is frozen at the moment. So I'm assuming he's doing some networking and doing some applications. I imagine there's a lot with all the uncertainty going on. This is a really common response for folks. How do you help your clients figure out what to do when they get that?
I hope it's not stopping at that first no, right, James?
Well, yeah, but there's also a different, I never reach out to someone and ask if they're hiring. I reach out and say, I am 100% sure you're not looking for somebody like me. So I'll remove myself because the problem is as soon as this is kind of along the lines of when folks are like, I don't understand why HR won't give me feedback on what I did poorly. Well, I'll tell you why. Because this is what HR gets. Somebody goes up to them and goes, hey, can you help me understand why you didn't hire me? And they go, oh yeah, we had another more qualified candidate. Oh, what made them more qualified? Well, they had this experience and you didn't. Well, let me explain to you why you got that wrong, right? And the HRs, so they tend to be hesitant to give feedback. Well, it's the same thing if you reach out to them and you're asking, hey, look, are you guys hiring? When are you hiring? So on and so forth. Instead of doing that, I tend to reach out with things along the lines of, hey, look, I know you're probably not looking for somebody like me, but can you help me understand what could somebody do to make themselves competitive? I only ask because down the line, I want to focus on making sure I'm getting the right experience. They'll answer that all day long. What do they have to lose? You're not asking for a job, right? Now there are techniques you can use to eventually pivot that conversation where you go, do you guys ever expect to be hiring in the future?
Yeah, psychology is incredibly important when you're trying to figure out the language to use when reaching out to a recruiter.
Not only that, timing matters. So that's the first thing. I had a guy we were coaching and he applied for a job and he got a like super generic, we've gone with our other qualified candidates. Now this guy was like way over, way qualified for the job. And so, I got him on the phone and said, hey, look, I think they did it because you were overqualified. But if you wanted to reword it here, you can reword it. Reword the question like this. But they're probably going to come back and tell you to go pound sand. Not go pound sand, but they're going to give you another generic response. And that's exactly what they did. They gave another generic response. Well, about an hour later, I was on LinkedIn and I went, hey, man, I found like 2 guys they hired. And he went, what do you mean? I went, well, there's some search techniques. And I went, they just hired these 2 people and one of them posted their resume. So I was able to pull a copy of their resume and I went, well, the person they hired has this flight time, like they're super inexperienced. So that's what they're looking for. So there are a lot of ways that you can research the answers that folks need, so that when you're talking to recruiters, you don't have to ask questions that they're not going to answer. You really want to focus on, what can I do to make myself more competitive? Do you think you guys will be hiring in the future? Where do you guys, would you be against helping me understand where do you post those jobs? What are the top things pilots do that make your life more difficult and pull them out of the running? Those are the type questions you really want the answers to. And just the fact that you're actually trying to look, the easier you make HR's life, the more job offers you're going to get. I don't care if you think HR should do it that way or not. It doesn't matter. The thing is, if you make their life easier, you will get more jobs. And so trying to find that out, HR recruiters will immediately pick up on the fact that you're trying to make their life easier, which will get you access to more information and move you up the pile. They don't like the process any more than you do. You think they like getting 5,000 resumes and have to pick out the top 10? No, they don't. It's not fun. So everybody knows the system is broken. But the reality is we all have to live inside that system. And so if folks can change some of their tactics in terms of the questions that they're asking, they'll get better information. And then downline, they can start to ask some of those other questions.
I want to circle back to something you mentioned about the flight time. We have another listener question, and she says she's getting feedback that she doesn't have enough flight time for some of these jobs she's applying for.
So when someone tells you flight time, the first objective is to find out, is it really flight time or is that just a BS answer you're giving me? Right? So I'll give you a real simple example. The insurance policy may require a certain type of experience, and they cannot get a waiver to it. If that's the case, then yeah, you're likely not getting past that. But a lot of the times, they have to give you something generic that's going to make you go away, and flight time is a very good answer, right? It's the same thing like if you walk into a car dealership and you can't get away from the used car salesman, what do you tell them? I can't afford the price. That may not be. You just may not like a red car. Maybe you don't like the car he's selling. But it's a generic answer people can give. So the first thing that folks really should try and hunt out is it legitimately a flight time issue or is it something else? If it's legitimately a flight time issue, you're probably not going to get around it. If it's something else, what you want to start focusing on is what types of issues is the flight department facing that your experience can bring value to that would offset that flight time. If you can do that, a lot of the times you can get around the flight experience issue. 2011, after I got furloughed from NetJets, I applied for a flight instructor job. I had 1,300 hours in a Saab 340, 500 hours in an Embraer 170. I had 800 hours in a Citation Sovereign, and I instructed at Embry-Riddle for an entire year.
Go Eagles.
And well, no, hold on. I got rejected from the flight instruction job because I didn't have enough piston time. Now, do you think they didn't hire me because they didn't have enough piston time, or do you think they didn't hire me because they just didn't like me? Now, if anybody knows me personally, we all know it was because they didn't like me. But my point is, flight time, a lot of the times is just a generic blow you off, kind of like we have more qualified candidates. So there are ways you can ask questions to discern, is it legitimately flight time or is it something else?
And while I agree with everything James just said, and James and I both have benefited, we worked at places, been hired places where we didn't meet the required minimums. And we've been hired there because it matters how you go about doing it and locality and how you approach the job. But right now, we do have to keep in mind with what's going on around the world. We got to keep in mind that there's expats that are losing their jobs and they're wanting to come home. You know, people have been waiting, trying to figure out, is that something I want to do? We've seen an uptick in that client-wise coming through the door. So there have been adjustments at some carriers. We do the best we can to pay attention to that, make sure we understand where that is. And we've been affected by it. But, you know, we're getting into a spot now where they can be more selective. So making sure that you're going into that interview, making sure that your application's polished is become way more important than it was just a few weeks ago. You got to play the game because it's extraordinarily competitive, and it's only going to get more so as we get closer to fall.
All right, guys, we're going to change gears a little bit. Let's talk about what's going on. Again, for our listeners, it's June 10th. But talk to us about the current news and what's going on at the major airlines and what you guys are seeing.
Actually, before you start talking, I do want to put a shameless plug in for the newsletter you guys are sending out. You're getting that too, right?
Yep.
It is really well done. And
It
I
is.
know, Jason, you and James are putting a ton of work into that. But just every single week, I think, what is it, Sunday that you send it out? There's just so much good information. And what I really appreciate is that you're going through and you're taking the news, doing a little bit of dissemination and explaining it, because the problem is that we get so bombarded with so much information from the forums and the news and stuff that it really can be overwhelming. So honestly, to me, that's one of my favorite ways of looking at what's happening. So I just want to thank you guys for that. And can you plug how people can subscribe to that too?
Sure. So I appreciate that. So if I'm being completely honest, Jason actually does most of the hard work. So he grabs contracts and news articles and scrubs the internet to put together a complete picture of what's going on. To be honest, the hard part is when we write these articles, Delta's had their displacement, United had their displacement. We're writing it so that anybody, corporate pilot, military pilot, or airline pilot, could read that and understand what's going on. So the amount of work that goes into kind of breaking that down is, like I said, Jason puts a lot of effort into that. So I don't want to take credit for all his hard work. The second part is in terms of getting on the list, they can either go to our website, there'll be a pop-up, or if they just email info@Raven Careers, or if you get me on LinkedIn, any one of those three, and just shoot us a message that says, hey, you want to be added to our list, and we'll put you on the list. Every Sunday, we give an email with news updates. And then pretty soon we're going to start transitioning on Wednesdays. And we're going to be sending out emails with useful content for job searching. Like, for instance, we've got a website where you can and it's free. You can take a company's website and put it in, and it'll tell you how their email system works. So it'll be like firstname.lastname@whatevercompanyname.com. So now you get on LinkedIn, you find a recruiter's name, and now you have their email address. So we're going to be shooting out a bunch of content like that weekly, every Wednesday. So folks want to know how to create LinkedIn content. They need to know how to track down recruiters. We've got some ways where you can take a job description and create a word cloud out of it. So you can figure out what are the keywords that you can kind of start bringing up in interviews.
On what James said, on what you guys said, hey, I really appreciate it. Thank you. It's become one of the main things I'm working on here weekly. Every day, it's a matter of getting on, reading the news, taking the temperature of the pilot group and seeing what's important and doing the best we can to break down just the facts. I mean, we really, really try hard to take any opinions we have out of it. When you've been seeing the breakdowns of the contractual stuff and the displacements, it's not just us looking at the memo and taking it apart. When I was in college, they said, it's all about who you know in the industry. So I've spent my entire career networking feverishly, trying to have as many contacts as humanly possible. I've got like 5,000 phone numbers in my phone. And I call people. I call program managers. I call directors of operations, anybody. We've been talking with one of the main union guys at one of these legacies and really working hard to make sure that when we're putting out the information that we are being as factual as humanly possible and breaking it down into terms that are understood across different airlines, because Delta words things one way, United words it differently. They've each got their individual languages and they got their own way of doing things. So it's really important to us to make sure that we're putting out information so that people can go beyond the headlines and go beyond the forums and understand what's going on as clearly as possible. And that's really what I'm trying to showcase. We're taking the quotes directly out of the memos. We're sharing things directly from the contract and putting it out there. So if you're forming an opinion about it, besides maybe the title that we use, that's something that you're formulating yourself. At least that's our intent when we write, is just to show this is what's going on, this is why they're doing it, how they're doing it, so that you can understand. And it's going out not just to the airline pilots, it's going to corporate, so corporate can understand what's coming their way too, and what it means in their language. We actually pass it through somebody that's not affiliated with aviation at all to make sure that we're not putting too many acronyms or putting in too many words that are just not understood outside of aviation. We want it to be clear.
Well, keep up the good work. I really enjoy it. I think you guys are doing a good job.
Yeah, it's a great product.
Thank you.
So what do you guys think about what's going on now? I guess something in the news, Southwest offered a pretty generous early out and leave of absence package. What did you guys think of that?
The difficult thing that we're dealing with right now is future bookings are all jacked up. So, airline executives are having to make decisions with really incomplete information. That, if you just took that on its own, right, that would be complicated. The problem is when you add in politics, right, of do companies want to break into other companies' hub markets? Do companies want scope relief? Do they need to reorganize kind of their international route structure? It starts to get really, really complicated really quick. So right now, it feels like every company is basically in the same spot in that they're just trying to reduce costs as much as possible, with the understanding that you can't cut to the bone, right? Because folks are worried about what happens in summer 2021, right? You take a look when you read a lot of the stuff with Southwest and you hear about, man, whose hub markets are they going to start going after? American's been talking about it. What are they going to do at different hub structures? So right now, I think everybody's kind of in the same spot in terms of within their contractual allowance. How can they reduce costs as much as possible, but not reduce it to the point to where they hurt themselves, where they can't spool the business model back up if they need to. Remember, hubs are very expensive to start up, very easy to lose. You start taking a look at places like New York, LA, San Francisco. You gotta protect that sandbox.
Yeah, I do think what you're seeing out of the carriers and working for the early outs is great to see. Whatever can be done to offset the potential for furloughs is great. Southwest is kind of leading the way with a really nice package for their top pilots. We hope that it works the way it's intended. And I believe that we'll continue to see carriers. Well, I know they're actively negotiating right now, unions with the management companies to make sure that they're doing things to mitigate the potential for furloughs. So it's nice to see. I personally was a big fan of the numbers that we saw come out of Southwest, because I think people will actually take that offer. Some of the other things that we've heard quoted and talked about as of recently, I don't think it's going to be as enticing at other carriers. So it's going to be interesting to see how the other carriers respond moving forward.
I thought what was kind of interesting is that you would think before you announce a displacement bid, you would see how many people you can effectively reduce your workforce by offering the early out and extended leaves, and then do a displacement bid according to that remaining group. So like Delta did this big displacement, but they haven't really gotten to the other furlough mitigation things. What's the logic in that? Do you guys have any insight?
Well, I think it puts pressure on the pilot group, right? So the company is the one that gets to determine how many pilots they need. It's not the union that determines how many pilots they need. So the company's making that determination, and they advertise their displacement, and then it brings in fear, it brings in emotion, right? We're emotional beasts, and when we see these big numbers, it drives us to do things. So we got to continue to look at these with a logical mind and try to understand what's the underlying action going to be at the end. And that's something that we've had a lot of discussions about with our clients and internally. What is this going to actually amount to?
Yeah, and it kind of brings us back to our conversation we had with Roy that we aired when Delta, they had a group of displacements that basically we coined it the waiting room. I don't remember what the official, the UNA, unavailable. When you said that it might be kind of a negotiating tactic on behalf of on the company's end, that being put into the waiting room might be a pretty powerful message.
But it does something else for the company, right? When they were taking people that were on the 757, the 767, and even I'm not sure if there's any captains, but really close to that line at least, and taking them, putting them down on 717 first officer pay. We ran some numbers, and just on purely min guarantee, I know there's people that took $65,000 a year pay cuts by getting put on that UNA list. And then you take into account reduced hours that they might get, and you take into account the credit that they might have been able to achieve just, last February. You're looking at over $100,000 pay cut for some of these people. It's substantial. So what Delta did is, besides early outs, besides anything else, it gives them a tool to ramp things up, but also gives them a major cost savings while they try to figure out what's needed.
It's interesting, the different strategies we're seeing. I mean, and to shift to the other carrier, American, it doesn't, they had a pretty good early out package and leave package. And then it doesn't seem like they're displacing and potentially furloughing as many pilots. So it's like they're almost positioning themselves differently than their competitors. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
A lot of folks think that this is purely conspiracy theory where management is trying to position themselves to furlough pilots and cut costs, right? And don't get me wrong. This is a great opportunity for management to take advantage of the economic factors to get concessions and potentially furlough staff. But you've got to take a step back from the emotion of that and think through that, right? If furloughing doesn't necessarily benefit them if they don't do it right, because what's going to happen is on that uptick, they're going to be behind and they're going to get crushed. The second thing is well, yes, we'll see what happens in the fall, right? But you'll start to see language coming out for management, highly likely, where they're going to start going after different contractual provisions, whether it's actual work rules or pay. We don't know, right? But you're starting to see stuff about scope and some other things like that. But don't underestimate how catastrophic what's actually going on right now. Like this is not like a manufactured crisis, right? I mean, you had the economy effectively ground to a halt. Whether you politically agree with that or don't agree with it is pretty much irrelevant, because the fact is it happened. And now we're still waiting to see, right, how many people that were laid off are actually going to come back to work. Are there going to be additional layoffs? And we don't know what that looks like yet, but it's going to have an effect on travel. And so when we're watching what's going on, we have to kind of keep that in mind, that to a certain degree, right? When I'll use Delta as a good example. Every time a memo comes out, we pour through it, whether it's from the company or the union. Do you know how many conflicting numbers are in there? The data is not good data. I mean, you'll go through and you'll compare. They said this week, but last week they used this number, and you're like, that's not. Sometimes it's within margin of error 2 or 3%, but sometimes it's 7-8% off, and you start to realize like that's not always a game. Sometimes it's just incompetence.
So when I brought up American earlier in 600 pilots, they were the first to come out with that. They were the first to come out with a buyout program. And I think they were shooting for around 1,000 or so. They got 600 plus that took it. It seems like, and this is just a guess, a wag, right? That American is going to reposition themselves in a way that they can utilize their domestic market as much as possible, put that to use, and really kind of sink all in. Let's see what we can do. Let's drive and get this going again. United's got massive international exposure that's hurting them. Delta's got exposure that's hurting them. American definitely has exposure that's hurting them, but they're taking completely different management styles on how they're dealing with it, at least in my eye. And I feel almost as though Americans just ready to put up a big fight and say, let's throw what we got at it. Let's see what we can do. It may pay off. It may not, but it is very interesting. And it has been interesting over the last couple of months to watch these different ideas and different messaging from each carrier. They've all been very unique. So it's going to be it's very intriguing for me to even think about what will 2021 look like. What's next summer going to look like, and it's going to be interesting even in the fall.
The one variable that a lot of guys are hanging their hat on is there's a lot of retirements. And I think we talked about this in one of the previous podcasts. Go back to 2001 and you'll read the exact same quotes. There's a lot of retirements. The thing that folks are not accounting for right now is the senior pilots at these airlines made it through September 11th, 2008, and now this. Their 401ks have been decimated. Right? Now, we just had this huge bull run between 2008 and today, right? So best case scenario, if they made some good investments, right, their 401k is doing pretty well. If we have a secondary pullback in the stock market or anything like that, these guys are in their top earning years where they're looking to make back whatever it was that they would have lost in the early part of the 2000s and mid part of the 2000s. So it's still a little early to kind of tell how many of those folks are going to take an early out retirement. In the mid 2000s, a little bit different, right? If you're worried, hey, they're going to declare bankruptcy and they're going to take money back from me, that's a little bit of a different situation. But right now, that's not particularly a huge fear. So that's just something kind of important to remember. Earlier we were talking about kind of some of the furlough numbers, and I ran some numbers back from 2003. Aero News Network published it on November 12th, 2003. And they ran through all the different airlines, how many pilots they had on staff and how many pilots they furloughed. You take a look at Delta. If you compare the Delta and Northwest certificates, they employed roughly 13,753 pilots and laid off 1,988 in the September 11th timeframe. That works out to be roughly about 14.4% of their seniority list. Currently, Delta has somewhere around 14,657 pilots, and around 2,327 were put on that UNA status. That's 15.8% of their list.
Oh, wow.
It's within basically 1.5%. If you run the same numbers out at American, if you combine American, America West, and U.S. Airways, in that time frame, they had 15,742 pilots. They furloughed 4,006 between the three carriers. America West furloughed none. It was 25% of their seniority list. And then if you take a look at United and Continental, they employed 12,181 and furloughed about 2,606. That was 21% of their seniority list. So when you take a look at some of the numbers, United's been floating around, you hear a lot of their management and unions saying 30%. Right, post September 11th, where you had a 30% reduction in flying, saw about a 21%, 25%, and about a 14.5%. Depending on which carrier you're talking about, the numbers are scarily close to what they said in September 11th.
The other thing that's scary is that the drop in demand now has been much more severe than it was after 9/11.
Yeah, did you notice in the last email update we started publishing the TSA numbers? We've been having, at least the feel I get is we watch social media, we watch the forums, and people are very excited to see the numbers, right? I flew 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago was the last flight I had. But the airplane was full, and I just flew home from a trip, and that airplane was full, and it's awesome to see. But we have to keep in mind that there's hundreds of airplanes parked still, hundreds of airplanes parked, and the TSA numbers, when we look over, say 5 days, 7 days look back, it's a pretty impressive looking line. But when you pull out and you look at where we are and where we were a year ago, we're still down 85, 90%. And something that I noticed in just that last week's update was the growth trend that I saw, and it's up on our website. The growth trend for the last week matches the growth trend from 2019, almost spot on, the 7-day moving average, because we're going to that summer uptick right now. So it's increasing, but and that kind of hit me in the gut a little bit when I saw that. It's pretty much the same line, the same trend. So 400,000 where we should be running at about 2.5 million. It's still a big difference, and it's we have airplanes coming back. United, I believe, is bringing back, 50 or 60 737s next month. Frontier brought back 6 airplanes. Delta's bringing back some aircraft. We're seeing that, but, they're still limiting aircraft capacity, which is going to hurt the bottom line. And although the planes are full, we're still paying for hundreds of airplanes to be parked and waiting. And I want to be positive. I want to be really excited because of the TSA numbers and because of what I see in the airplanes. But we got to stay metered, right? We got to understand and we got to prepare for the potential for numbers not to recover as quickly as it may look like they are.
Think about it this way. You're taking a look at the engine gauges. The oil temperature's going up, the oil pressure's going down, and the vibration monitor is increasing. You want to leave the power levers at MCT and just keep trucking along? Cool. That's sitting on the sidelines and going, man, I really hope this goes well. Don't be negative. Everything's in tolerance, right? Or you can sit down, maybe ease off on the power a little bit and grab a checklist out for an engine failure. That way, if it does fail, right, you're at least ready. That's your networking. The reality of the situation is right now, the numbers are not good. And when we talk about the future, it is speculation because we've never been in a situation like this before where we had such a precipitous drop off in travel that we know is not going to sustain long term, right? I mean, you're talking, what was it, a 95% drop off, right? Nobody in their right mind thinks it's staying at a 95% drop off. The question is, what is it going to recover to and how long is it going to take to get there? In the meantime, and I don't mean to destroy the negativity with something positive, but corporate aviation, what was it last week? They're about 58% of 2019 levels. Get on LinkedIn, Google News, and look up corporate aviation, right? Fundamentally, post-September 11th, the limit to getting people on airliners was a fear of safety. That was pretty, if you think about it, it's pretty easy, right? You get the TSA, put up a bulletproof door, and give some pilots some guns, and people all of a sudden go, hey, I'm comfortable getting on an airplane that you can prevent this thing from being taken out. When you have coronavirus, it's a little different. There is no vaccine. We don't currently have herd immunity. And so you have a situation where people are afraid to be near each other. Not everybody, but enough people are afraid to be near each other. That's a problem. That's I know the airlines want to talk about their HEPA filters and everything, but when the guy sitting 2 seats next to me sneezes on me, your HEPA filter is not going to fix that. Okay, so if we go to the next logical conclusion, now you have people with money that can choose who gets on their airplane. They don't have to sit in a large group in a terminal, and they don't have to deal with the capacity constraints. For any of the listeners that are airline pilots, your commute's gotten a little more nuanced over the past 2 or 3 months, right? So when you start taking a look at airline capacity, domestically and international, corporate aviation makes a really compelling case. Taking a look at the Amazon carriers, Amazon's doing pretty well right now, right? So there are opportunities out there and there are places to look, but sitting back and going, man, I really hope that Thanksgiving travel booms this year, I think is a little delusionally optimistic. But I'm more than happy to get back on here Thanksgiving and eat my words and say, hey, I was like, and I really seriously hope I get to do that, right? I hope come Thanksgiving, I go, hey, I was wrong. But the vibration monitor's ticking up, the oil temperature's going up, and the pressure's dropping.
You have to figure that we're not going to get back to pre-COVID-19 levels until there's a vaccine. Like it's sort of appreciable rate, right?
Or herd immunity.
Yeah, and in the next couple of weeks will be interesting too, because we've been having the protests across the country in these large gatherings of people, right? So if we see an uptick in cases, it's going to have an effect, and if we see that there's no uptick in cases, it's going to have potentially the opposite effect, right? So we're probably 2 to 3 weeks away from something happening, or at least a report on things going one or the other from that's expected. And what will that do for bookings? What's that going to change? So it's a constantly changing, shifting target that we have to deal with. So, trying to forecast what's going to happen is incredibly difficult. One thing we haven't talked about in this call today, and I don't know if you've noticed in the newsletter, we're trying to put it in there. Whether or not people are reading it, I'm not sure. But what James was talking about with, people that are well-to-do, they are buying business jet seats now. If they want to go down to Naples, where they would have hopped on a first class flight to go down there, they're now looking and they're paying, maybe twice as much to still go on that trip, but they want to ensure that they're sitting next to people that they know are healthy. And the corporate operators are putting in the same protections that you're seeing airlines, mandatory temperature screenings, face masks, all sorts of things. So we're seeing a shift in where a business jet was looked at as a extreme cost or the absolute luxurious thing to do. It's now being seen as a safer alternative for business travel and for first class customers. And we need to be aware of that moving forward, because it changes the outlook for quite a few carriers.
And I think what'll be interesting, and this is a completely different discussion, but the corporate pilots that recently all left to go to the airlines and they're at the bottom of the seniority list and now have to make the jump back, that's going to be some really delicate conversations. And I imagine the way you have to shape your profile and the conversations you have, it takes a lot of work. You can't just go in guns blazing.
They've been heartbreaking conversations to have, because it is difficult to make that pivot back.
The biggest thing that folks are running into, and that they're terrified of running into, that there are some really good answers for that they don't have, are, well, how do I know you're not going to go back to company brand X? Or, well, what are you going to do when they recall you? Just going to quit? And 9 out of 10 people are not going to make it through that question without prep, because first of all, you don't want to wait for them to bring that up. Because if you do, it's going to be a defensive posture, which is not good. And number 2, there is a way for you to bring it up early and put it on the table and pick it apart piece by piece so that it's not an issue. But, for the folks out there, they're going to have to answer that question, whether they were a former corporate pilot or not, which is, what are you going to do when United, Delta, American, Southwest, FedEx, calls you back? And, well, man, I always really wanted to work at Sun Country. Really? Then why didn't you apply when we were hiring 3 months ago? Right? I mean,
or why did you turn us down 3 months ago? Which
why did
we have seen
quit? Right? You're not going to get away with that one easily. And so there's some techniques to get around that, but folks need to start thinking about, through their networking and their interviewing, how are they going to answer, hey, when Delta calls you back, when United calls you back, what are you going to do? What are you going to do when someone says, hey, I want you to resign your seniority number? Now, I know there's a lot of people that are going to go, well, I'm telling them to go pound sand. Well, okay, that's great. And then you're going to walk away without a job. And resigning the seniority number is not probably going to be a hot idea either. So how do you navigate around that so you can still give yourself the max opportunity to get the job and not resign the seniority number? These things are difficult. They're complicated. They're nuanced. I would not go into an interview hoping that doesn't pop up, because spoiler alert, it's going to, unless the person that's hiring you is not familiar with the aviation industry.
When we went through that before and people wrote in to resign their seniority number, didn't the airlines not actually resign the seniority number?
It depends. I mean, I had that issue at NetJets. They would go, okay, you sign the letter that resigns your seniority number and we'll mail it in for you. So now you call up Chief Pilot and you go, hey man, if you get his resignation letter in like 2 weeks, could you throw that in the garbage? And they went, no. Yeah, really. So, it's a very, and look, besides the point, let's say, brand X legacy airline goes, okay, we won't accept any resignation letters until you're recalled. Well, everyone in the industry is going to get word of that. So, at that point, it doesn't really matter. You're going to have to navigate. You're going to have to disarm that with words. There's no trick that's going to get you out of that. But, we get calls 3-4 times a day. People absolutely terrified. How am I going to explain this? And we do the same thing all the time. Hey, just run me through what you're thinking about saying.
I think a great way to deal with it is in interview setting, right? So we do quite a few mock interviews, and to be able to just throw that at someone when they're not expecting it and see how they respond, it very clearly identifies that it's a hurdle they got to get over, and to deal with it when you're not expecting it and then work through it and come up with a creative way to deal with it is beneficial.
But you can start dismantling it during the networking. You dismantle it during the phone interview. You then dismantle it during the face-to-face interview. There's a whole process that goes into it, so that by the time it gets to the point, you're the one that's brought it up. You've leaned into it head on, and you've done everything within your power to pull the teeth out of that dog.
It's good. Well, I think that's a good place to end for today. We've really covered quite a bit of territory.
Does anybody need therapy now, or are we all good?
Yeah.
Did you guys want to hear what I know is going to happen in the fall?
Yes. It's gonna get cooler.
Yeah. Deer hunting season.
That's
Yeah.
exactly.
Yes.
Fellas, well, we certainly appreciate your time and your insight. If folks want to get a hold of you guys, other than LinkedIn, which they need to go create an account and network with you there, how can people reach out?
Sure. Ravencareers.com is a good way. They can click direct access to my calendar and then schedule a time. Otherwise, info@Raven Careers. If folks connect to us on LinkedIn, it's pretty helpful. When we're talking to recruiters and they're looking for people, we have a running list of folks that we're working with. So we'll just shoot your LinkedIn page directly over to the recruiters. That way they know what they're looking for. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. So any one of those ways works.
All right, fellas. So we appreciate you breaking it down for everybody. So thanks.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
So, Max, that was very eye-opening, some of the stuff they had to talk about on LinkedIn. I'm going to try and go back and find the LinkedIn photo that was on your profile for about 8 years. Maybe transmit that over social media. Mine was probably just as bad.
Let's not.
But the good news is you and I have both spruced up our profiles in the last year.
I'm forcing myself to be more active.
Yeah.
Even though social media, I think all of you've gathered, is not really my jam, but LinkedIn is, like I said, for the best way to explain LinkedIn to millennials is it's social media with an actual purpose, besides seeing what your high school friends had for dinner and all the other fake stuff people are posting about. But anyway, yeah, James, Raven guys always have some great information. So I hope you guys enjoyed that.
Yeah. All right. Let's do another story time. We were talking about, I think it was last episode, we talked about you being a check airman at our flight school and some of the things you did. And this is my favorite story of you as a check airman.
This is a favorite? Really?
Well, it's one of my favorites.
I'm really uncomfortable telling all these stories. Someone's certificate's going to get recalled. But so the one he's encouraging me to tell now, I remember I was given a check ride that's a stage check, and it was equivalent of single engine instrument, but it was like holds and basic instrument
no
stuff.
Certificates were on the line. So
no, you're right. It was a stage check. So it was no approach to anything. You did it as in a 172. So I'm going up and giving a guy a hold, DME hold. And I think it was a DME arc and a VOR hold,
like
intersection hold. Yeah. All this. And so I think it was right after lunch, which you know how it is. If you're in training or after lunch, you always get a little sleepy sometimes. So I'm sitting in the 172. I give the guy a hold over the AM radio station that we used as the NDB for these.
Right.
And so I send him there and I give him a hold. And we're chugging along. And it's just a little bit bumpy, and I kind of settle in and I'm getting a little sleepy. And so I remember we're on our way to the NDB. And then the next thing, I wake up right as the student rolls into a turn. And I'm sitting there and I open my eyes and I don't move. And I'm like, oh God. And I'm looking at the instruments and I'm looking at the needle and I'm like, okay, so we were flying away from the station. He's turning left. The hold that I gave him, and I look over on his knee board and I'm like, and so I sat there for a minute and the student's kind of getting nervous, you can tell, and kind of fidgety. And I'm like, God, is he screwing this up? And so I had to basically look at the hole. I'm like, okay, we came from the airport. So we came inbound on this heading. And then we went outbound and he started to turn to the left. And I'm like, oh, he's turning the wrong way. And I'm like, God, I got to be sure. So I go back through to my head while he's turning back to the NDB. And And I'm like, yeah, he definitely was supposed to turn in the same direction as holding turns. And he's turning opposite direction. I'm like, I got bad news, man. You turned the wrong direction on the hold. So do you want to continue or go back? And anyway, I had to give the guy an unsat, but so I was dozing off. But I was, at the end of the day, I was confident it was the right call. I mean, he did certainly turn the wrong direction, but.
Oh man. Well, I mean, we've always laughed at that story. It's so funny that you were able to do that. But like, I always wondered how many sim instructors at the big box simulator places fall asleep, operating the sims.
Oh, dude, I've caught them before.
Yeah,
for sure. Or back there on their iPads. Ever since the iPad revolution, those guys are back there reading the news. And like, what happened?
Yeah, cleared for the approach.
Yeah,
or you shoot the approach and the weather's at 0-0, and then you're, never mind. Yeah. But I imagine there's a fair amount of snoozing going on. It's good times. It's one of the stories from the glory days.
I had to pull one from the archives.
Yeah. So, anyways, well, thanks so much to Jason and James from Raven Careers for coming on, and thanks to Harvey Watt Insurance for sponsoring the show. Really appreciate it. We've got some vacation time coming up, Max. We're going to be heading for the hills for a little while. We'll have some content to keep you heading through the summer, but we've been going for April of 2019.
Yeah, it's
time for a little hiatus.
Pretty respectable run for a couple of pilots without a vacation.
Exactly. So we'll take a few weeks off to get some fresh content for you guys, but you can always be connected to us on the website. It's 215podcast.com. Blog posts are still getting posted regularly. Lots of great information.
And of course, connect with us on LinkedIn in light of our interview this episode.
We actually have a little LinkedIn stuff going on.
And as James recommends, don't just connect, send a little message too. I thought that was good advice, actually.
Yeah, I've gotten those. I remember getting those.
Who's this guy?
Do you ever get those like connections from these people? And you're just like, this is just a total waste of, like, the vacuum cleaner salesman that's trying to connect with you and sends you a message. Love your profile. That photo is so cool. So, anyways, of course, we're on Instagram also and Facebook. It's at 215 Podcast.
Don't be afraid to leave us a review, good, bad, or otherwise.
That's right. We're sending something out. July 15th is the deadline. We'll pick one at random. Until then, just remember, folks,
flexibility is the key to air power.
See you next time.
Later.
Rock on.